Hello and welcome to The Agenda, live and interactive here on Politics Social with Phil Moorhouse. How you doing, Phil? You all right?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah,
goody. And I'm Graham Hughes. Hello. And a big shout out to everyone in the chat before we get started. Oh, I think I've just realised that I didn't actually update. Oh no, Phil, I've still got the chat up from this morning. This isn't this afternoon's chat. This is this morning's chat. All right. I'll get rid of it. And while I'm doing that, you can quickly tell us, like, where's Labour? What are they doing? What's Labour? Where are they?
Right,
why aren't they doing stuff? Phil.
All right, let me explain it then. Let me explain. So first of all, just obviously to be clear, after the Supreme Court ruling, which again is not the judge's fault, it's the legislation's fault, what legal experts who've commentated have said, they've explained the situation. The judge, the head of the Supreme Court who actually read out his judgment even said people should not seek political capital out of this, but inevitably they know they would.
And people were popping the champagne. Just before we go on, Phil, we have had a very, very early super chat, so I want to just address that before it goes off the top of the screen. Thanks so much to John C. As a token of appreciation for Graham and Phil, I would struggle to get through this madness without your thoughts and analysis. Looking forward to when the political pendulum swings in favour of love and tolerance. We're all looking forward to that. If you'd like to join John C. and Scott and Daylight Dave, Unquiet Badger, Amy and Hating Puds and Chris C. and others in the chat, all you need to do is hit that subscribe button and wait for a minute and you'll be able to join the chat. But we're having no TERFs, no transphobes, no bigots. If you are a bigot, there are literally 1,000 other media outlets for you to enjoy in your own little bigoted wilderland, whatever, wilderness. Don't come here, okay? You're not welcome, and we will mute you and boot you. Anyway, Phil, back to Labour. Where's Labour? Where are they?
So what should happen, what should have happened, hasn't happened, but what should have happened is the judges have basically said, look, you've got the word woman here. It has to mean a thing. And in this bit, it's talking about pregnancy, so it can only refer to biological women. So therefore, it has to refer to biological women for everything else, because you cannot try and argue a case in law. Oh yeah, woman means this here, but this here, and that doesn't make sense. So all that has to happen is for the government to say, look, it's really simple. We'll change woman to biological women for these bits, and then we'll put in the definition that woman also includes trans women, at the very least, with a gender recognition certificate.
Well, yeah, right? That's what I don't understand. That's why they didn't do that.
Okay, so I'll explain why they didn't do it. And this is really to point out so we're about positive action. In order to get positive action, you can shout through a megaphone at the government. Sure, why not? But what you need to do is to organise a campaign that means that it's in Labour's political interests to do that. At the moment, they don't think what. Now, let me explain why it is. It's a little bit long-winded, but I'll try and do it as quickly as I can. So first of all, this doesn't sound relevant, but it is. This is, if you, in every election in my lifetime, from 1979 all the way to 2024, add up the share of the vote that went to the Labour and the Conservatives combined.
Phil, can you make that a bit smaller, mate? Can you make it a little bit smaller on your screen? Because you can't see the Tory and Labour share at the top. There you go. That's better.
Anyway, so that is the Tory and Labour share in every election. You can see every now and then there's an election that polarises people. Like we saw a big spike a few years ago over Brexit. That's a polarising issue. But when normal politics reigns, that figure has been coming down. It's a very clear downward trend. That is what polling analysts call a fragmentation of the vote. Now, what used to happen in politics, and this is how every political strategist that works at every political party is still trained to think, is there's a whole mass of voters who you can rely on to vote for you. So the difference between winning and losing an election, I'll just get rid of it because I've made the point there. The difference between winning and losing an election is just those small number of key swing voters in key constituencies. So you just want to appeal to them. You identify like in the Tony Blair years, it was called Mondeo Man. I don't think they had a fancy name this last year, but there were two groups of people Labour had to try and target. There were like 50-year-old men who didn't have a degree, white van man, things like that. And then there were sort of roughly 40-year-old single women. Those were the two key target voters. The problem is, but even doing that, obviously Labour famously got a very small share of the vote. So this fragmentation of politics now makes it really difficult to do that, to just target a couple of types of voter and still win an election. But that is still what you've got to do, because you do not have the bandwidth, at least not using normal campaign methods. We could talk about social media, but that'll be going off on a tangent. So in terms of the campaigning wisdom that the existing political strategists are familiar with, they have to be able to target a couple of groups of people, but it's much less effective with this fragmentation of the vote. So what Labour have to do is they have to try and find a massive group of voters to appeal to. And this is where this comes into it, because this is what's called the political compass. People think about politics as being left and right, and it is very wrong, and it is the source of a lot of people getting things fundamentally wrong. Politics is not left and right. Left and right is purely about economic policy.
Can you make that a bit smaller?
Graham. Right.
There you go. Perfect.
Cool. Left wing is really simple. Let me explain what left wing is. It's dead easy. First of all, that the state should manage production. That means if you're very far on the left, you want them to directly control production, but either way, you at least want them, where the private sector exists, to regulate. So you want the state to oversee production. And part of it also includes taxation, that taxation be progressive. That's left wing. Anything else is not left wing. So immigration, trans rights, gay rights, anything else, like literally every other policy you can think of, has got nothing to do with left and right. It's up and down. It's social policies. And there's a lot of people who are economically left wing and liberal. And there's a lot of people who are economically right wing and liberal. And there's a lot of people who are economically right wing and authoritarian. But there are also a lot of people who are left wing and authoritarian. Now, depending on where you are in the country, you may more readily than others believe it. Where I live, North Midlands, north of England type areas, there's a lot of people like that. And that's why Boris Johnson was able to win over the Red Wall. It wasn't just about Brexit. It was because he combined. No one else had ever tried to appeal to these people. These people had traditionally voted Labour because economics is the most important issue. The economy is the most important issue, and these people are left wing. They want strong public services, they want good workers' rights, they want good jobs, they want housing and all the rest of it. They're left wing, right? But they're also lock the bastards up and throw away the key, anti-immigration, monocultural, which means anti any sort of rights for minorities that aren't them.
Phil, do you want to take the screen off? The image. So I can show you, yeah.
So that group have never been targeted by anyone until Boris Johnson in 2019, where he combined an authoritarian manifesto with, we're going to build hospitals, we're going to level up, we're going to get you better jobs, we're going to lower the cost of living, through the medium of Brexit. But it wasn't Brexit that did it. It was that offer, that twinning together of left wing. So Boris Johnson presented, believe it or not, a left-wing offer that he had no intention of delivering on, with an authoritarian offer. And
in
where
some way,
Boris Johnson,
Trump is the same. He's got the unions on side in America, which is usually a left-wing thing.
And again, it's because a lot of the people who run like left-wing parties tend to be quite educated. The more educated you are, the more liberal you tend to be. And because of that, you associate the left wing with liberal ideas, but there's a whole mess of people out there who are not. And the problem is, with that fragmentation of the vote, that group of voters is now huge. And also, they've been tapped into. Boris Johnson tapped into them. He couldn't keep them because he didn't deliver on the economic policies. He didn't build the hospitals. He didn't level up. He didn't give the good jobs. So exactly. So that's why those people turned away from the Conservatives. But Reform UK are trying to ease into them. Yeah. So what Labour are doing?
Reform UK talking about nationalising steel.
Yeah.
This is the party of the ultra disaster capitalist scum, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, we should." Just before we go on, Phil, we had a super chat a while ago from one angry pagan. I was going to say one angry badger then. So, one angry pagan says, "Frigs, love and blessings to all ye wonderful badgers." It is obviously Friday today. It's Good Friday today. I don't think it's a Good Friday, but it is Good Friday. And also, Zante Sukan Amy, thank you very much for gifting the membership. So welcome new members. We've got Azina there. We've got Sandra, Ben, Lawrence, and Davina. Thank you very much for to Amy there for funding their membership for a month. So I'm gonna have to change the end credits, Phil. Add their names again.
Just so in terms of basically what Labour are doing is they're camping in that area, and the reason I'll tell you the reason. It's actually not so much about Reform UK, although that is a factor. It's mostly about the Conservatives. The Conservatives are not going to be able to come back to power on an economic policy, so they are going to lean into social policies. So what Labour are doing is they're camping on their lawn. So when the Tories try and make a distinction between themselves and Labour on immigration, Labour are going, no, it's not a distinction. And the same is applying here. And it's working in a sense in that if you look at the Tories now, what are they trying to campaign on? Pissing food, woke sandwiches and woke war.
Yeah.
So that is where
they're stuck. Food. I don't know if there's anything they're campaigning on at the moment.
That's what they are.
The Tories are just, I mean, they're in a bad place because of the Tories, but I mean, they seem to be really listless, really rudderless. There doesn't seem to be any direction of travel apart from we're not Labour, we're not Reform.
And if you have sandwiches at lunch, you're a wimp. That is their line. So
real men don't eat sandwiches.
So what I'm trying to say to you is the general strategy is working. However, in this specific case, it's not correct. And I'll tell you why. So there's two... And a lot of people in the chat will do this as well. Let me please tell you something important about polling. You will see polling, I'm going to show you some in a minute that doesn't look very nice, but you will see polling that tells you what majority public opinion is. Like there's people at the moment going on, oh, the majority want like privatisation of water, stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. There's always two problems with polling like that people read too much into it because they don't understand how polling works. The first is if it's a policy, you have to ask, do you also support the mechanism to achieve that outcome? But the second thing is saliency. How important is this to your voting decision? Now, there has been recent polling on trans attitudes. It doesn't make for very nice reading. I'll show it in a minute. But what you don't see very often is polling on saliency. That is, but even though these are your attitudes, do they affect how you vote? But the last time I saw any polling on trans attitudes was like a couple of years ago, and the answer was no. So it's like you can have a majority of the public who go, oh yeah, trans women shouldn't use toilets, as if they should just, I don't know how they're supposed to have a piss, do it in a drain maybe, I don't know. But they'll have that attitude, but then when you ask them, but will it decide your vote? They'll go, no. And I can say that this is anecdotal from my point of view. I talk to a lot of gammons, right? I live in gammon country. I'm going to have a gammon mayor in a few weeks. I have a bad feeling. But the...
Andrew Jenkins, yeah.
Yeah. But when you talk to them, right, these people will absolutely use their vote on immigration issues because they think that immigrants are hurting them. They will absolutely use their vote sometimes on anti-benefits policies, right? Because they think, oh, they're costing me. But I've talked to them, right? And these people will absolutely be on the gender critical side. But when you say to them, you know, is this going to change your vote? They don't say, yeah, they don't say it will. And the reason is they don't know trans people. If they did, those trans people probably wouldn't reveal themselves because of them. So these, like most people don't really know trans people. I only know some indirectly. Like my stepdaughter has a friend who's a trans man, for example. But he's not closely known to me personally. I met him, that's it. But these gender critical people don't know any trans people, because trans people will stay away from them. So they aren't going to use their vote on it. And that's where Labour are getting this wrong. Labour are wanting to camp on this. They're wanting to appeal to that left-wing but authoritarian group. But they're not making the distinction between the authoritarian policies that do swing votes and the ones that don't. This one, I guarantee, doesn't. The saliency is too low. If they did it now, they could, yes, there'll be a massive brouhaha in the papers. Do you know what? But it's already there.
So if they did what now, Phil?
Change the legislation, tidied it up.
Yeah.
To put it back to what people's previous understanding was, but you know,
yeah. So
trans women don't want pregnancy rights anyway. That's ridiculous.
Cis women and trans women who have a gender recognition certificate. I think that's fair to everyone. I don't understand why the anti-trans lot would have a problem with that, except for the fact that they don't want trans people to exist. John C, before we go on, welcome, is now a megastar. I think that's the first megastar we've had on the show. So thank you very much to John C for joining the megastar tier of membership of this channel.
But what I would argue to Labour MPs, this is what my pitch would be. It has very low saliency. We know what the attitudes are. In fact, let me just show them. It doesn't make for very pleasant reading. This is just a couple of them.
You need to shrink it.
YouTube.
I cut the edges off you.
Yeah. YouGov see, he's cancelling my sides. YouGov have done some polling at the end of last year, and you can see this is attitudes over time. What you can see is a couple of worrying crossovers as well. So on the bottom, increased recognition and rights of transgender people does in orange or does not in purple pose any genuine risk to women's rights. Now, a couple of years ago, women, it was pretty close, but slightly more women thought it didn't represent a threat to them than did. You could see it was mostly men with that attitude. Although even then, only slightly more, right? But now it's been a complete switchover. Women have massively gone towards, oh yeah, trans women are a threat to me. Or trans people in general. Maybe they think trans men are a threat to them.
There's been a lot of money spent on making people think that way.
Yes, exactly. And this is why we can see the power of campaigning to change public attitudes. Now, the regressive campaigners have a lot of money and they have access to the media. And this is why it's so important. All we have is numbers. We have numbers and we don't use them because whenever progressive groups try to get together on something, it then descends into fighting about something they disagree with. It's like, shut up about what you disagree with. Should we just focus on what we agree with? But there's been a worrying switch in terms of that 25 to 49-year-old group as well. And that is a key group. So that will be what Labour are looking at. They'll be looking at that and thinking, shit, that's our key group. But they're not thinking, but they're not going to change their vote based on it. It's like there are loads of people who will absolutely say, oh yeah, trans people bad, shouldn't have these rights. But when they go to the voting poll, the polling stations, what they're thinking about is not trans rights, because they don't know any trans people. What they're thinking about is the economy better? Is the NHS better? Could I get a bus to this bastard polling station? Things like that. Is my job better? Yeah. That's what they're thinking about. And I would argue this to a Labour MP. If you do this now, you're going to have a big argument in the paper, but the papers are bashing you anyway. You're going to have it, and then it'll be done, and it'll be tidied, and we're back to where our previous understanding was. And years later, no one will even be thinking about it. Whereas, taking the position that they are now, what they'll be doing is they'll be risking this blowing up in a pretty big way. I would actually remind them of the position, you said this, when Hamas attacked and Labour, and I said at the time, you know, Labour were trying to distinguish themselves from the anti-Semites by, instead of calling for a ceasefire, calling for a humanitarian pause, right? But it got them into trouble, didn't it?
Yeah.
And it caused them trouble in the election. They lost a few seats because of it.
You just said ceasefire. Would make no difference.
Yeah, exactly. So you were right on that. And that's what I would argue to Labour MPs. You're doing the same thing here.
Yeah.
You're trying to keep a lid on it, but in reality, you are risking this blowing up over the next few years. Yeah. And then what you're going to do, you're going to be trapped between a choice of either trying to brazen it out, in which case you risk losing seats over. I'm not saying this is actually electorally risky, but indirectly it could be, right, in terms of momentum against them. Or you risk having to fix it in a couple of years when you're then closer to the election and you probably don't want a culture war at that point. You can afford it now, do it now. That would be my pitch to Labour MPs.
Yeah, I agree. Jenny, thank you so much for the £5 super chat. Imagine if Russell Brand's upcoming trial allowed him to have Tate and Trump as character witnesses, but not allow any of his victims to testify.
Well, exactly.
Thank you for the super chat, and that is so well put. Great analogy. It's exactly the same situation that we've seen in the Supreme Court, where trans people and trans groups were not allowed a voice, whereas 4 different, specifically anti-trans voices, and one of them based in 55 Tufton Street in fucking London, like that's the HQ
when
of
this
the
was supposed to be
disaster
about
capitalist
Scottish
billionaires.
Yeah, this is supposed to be about a Scottish issue. But anyway, that is true. But again, what I'm going to say is legal expert, I wouldn't put the emphasis on the judgment because first of all, the judgment's been made. Second of all, I have seen trans allied legal experts also saying the issue is the legislation. There's no point in trying to find like reasons to fault the judges or anything like that. The judges actually, you know what they said, it made sense. So what you just need to do is just tidy up the legislation, which could be done really quickly and easily.
Yes.
And there'll be a huge brouhaha in the papers, but there is anyway.
This would be an amendment to an already passed bill. It's do you know, they call it, what do they call it? Like a statutory instrument they use.
Oh, no. They will have to go through a vote. They'll have to put it through Parliament. But it'll have to go through the processes. But you're not changing that much. And the Tories will try and slow it down. But
it's not a whole new law that has to go through a white paper, green paper, first reading, second reading.
No, not at all.
Is an amendment.
Well, no, you do have to go through the voting process. But what you could also then do, the government could then also say, and because we're changing the law now, we're going to change a bit of guidance. Like, for example, British Transport Police, yeah? So they're now saying trans women will be searched by male officers. So, okay, you're going to say the law is like it is now. Why can't you change that to, we're going to give them a choice? Why can't you give people a choice? Why can't you give anyone a choice? Do you want to be searched by a male or female officer? You could change the guidance, couldn't you?
But then what if it was a man who really wanted, you know, that men...
Don't matter. They're being searched.
Flashes
it's irrelevant.
or send dick pics to women, like, to force...
Yeah, but it's a female officer. She'll just club them over the head. It's fine. Kick them in the balls. Whatever. That solves it. That solves the problem.
I don't know if that... I would just say, like, it should be what it is at the moment, where...
But... They can't, because they have to respect the judgment.
Yeah, but how? Like, you're going to have a situation now, aren't you, where there's coppers, police officers who are bad apples, all 10 million of them, who will say, strip naked to a woman, to a cisgender woman, and she'll say, I'm cisgender. And they'll say, but I think I have reason to believe that you might be trans.
No. Because you can deal with that in guidance. They're not doing, so that is a risk. But they could change it in guidance. They could say, you have to be 100. If a person tells you, like you ask them, and if a person tells you they're a woman, you must believe them unless you have compelling reason to the opposite. And that way, any male police officer who did that, make it very clear to them, we will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law if you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's what the government could do. The government, the Home Office could issue that guidance immediately.
They need to do that immediately because already in London, police officers now have the right to say to a teenage girl, get naked in front of me. And there's nothing legally to protect that girl, except that the copper will say, I thought they were trans.
That's not true, by the way. Legal experts have said that is actually not true. And the judge made it clear. Just to be clear on this, that is not true. I'm not saying that will not happen. What I am saying is, it is not, what you've just said, Graham, is not true. The judge made it very, very, very clear that you cannot use this to harass trans people. And if you did that, that would be harassing trans people.
That wouldn't be harassing a trans person. That would be
harassing because you'd be asking person. No, because what you've described would be like a strip search by definition is harassment. So you have to already have a compelling reason to do it. And if you're going to claim that they are you thought they were trans. That's not good enough. That is actually not good enough.
No, that won't be the reason for the strip search. The strip search will be, we think you got drugs on you, as has been done to children in London over the last few years. Hundreds of children who have been strip searched because they might have drugs on them.
But what you're not paying attention to is the fact that that was declared illegal.
Yes, okay, all
That's
right.
still illegal. That is still illegal.
Whatever the compelling reason is, it's not because I think you might be trans, take your clothes off. It's I think you are concealing a weapon. I think that you have got drugs on you or whatever it is. And then a male police officer can do that now, or Transport Police have said they're going to use male police officers to strip search trans women.
But I want to just make it clear, they have no legal right to do that. The reason why it happens, and the reason why so many get away with it, is because so few people then make serious complaint that can take legal action afterwards. Because whenever people do take legal action, it's always found that the police officer was out of order. You actually cannot just randomly strip search someone.
I'm not saying it's random. I'm saying they've got compelling evidence
but
to say that a young girl has tried to commit suicide even, which can lead to a strip search, which often it does, because they say, we're going to put you in a cell because that's going to stop you, having these thoughts. And before we do that, we're going to strip search you and take out your piercings so you can go in the cell and you can't harm yourself in the cell. That's the excuse.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is, it's not going to be, we think you're trans, take your clothes off. It's going to be a case of a male police officer saying that this will happen. I guarantee this will happen. In the next few years, you will have a case, at least one of them, where a male police officer who has malintent says to a young woman, take your clothes off, I need to do a strip search. And she says, hang on, a woman needs to do this. And they'll say, no, I have reason to believe that you are a trans woman. How does she prove otherwise?
I'm telling you, I am guaranteeing you, because I've heard lawyers say this, if that happens, then as long as that victim goes straight to a lawyer, that police officer will go to prison. That is illegal.
But they thought they were
a police officer is not allowed to just go. A defence is not. I thought. That's not a defence. You actually have to have evidence. I had reason
to believe they were a trans woman.
You can't saying those words isn't a defence. People think it is.
How are they going to define it?
That's not a defence. They have to have. You have to be able to explain what gave you that good reason. And in a court of law, it's defined as being a reasonable person has to think that was compelling. It's not. Okay. It's not down to a police officer's judgment. It's down to in law, and it's in law. It is down to. I'm not saying it won't happen, but if it does happen, it is illegal. And if anyone really presses major complaint, that police officer will be sacked and find themselves in prison.
I think you've got more faith in the system than I do, because I think it's going to happen, and I think they're going to get away with it, and they're going to say, I think any reasonable person would look at this young teenager who is, might have short hair, for instance, and assume that they were a trans woman, and therefore we're going to strip search them with two male officers in the room.
Azina there saying, who's going to stop them, Phil? Well, no one's going to stop a police officer doing that. But what I am saying is a court of law will not acquit that police officer, because we've seen courts of law convict police officers for this. The problem is that too often they don't get charged. Because it's a big deal going up against the police for a vulnerable victim. That's the problem.
Yeah. I think you're making my point for me here.
No, I'm not, because I'm not arguing against the fact this will happen. You're trying to make the case that the police officer can legally do that, and they cannot.
I think they would have a leg to stand on in court that they never had before, because they will say, I genuinely believed that then they'll be asked, what gave you that reason? And it will be a young woman who looks a bit masculine, perhaps. Some women do. And they say, well, look at them. A reasonable person would look at this person and assume they were trans.
No, they won't. That absolutely will not work in a court of law.
Why not?
They will say, what reason did you have?
Because they looked like they were trans. That was the reason.
No.
And then they could get a selection of people off the street and say, do you think this person is a trans?
That's not how courts work. That's not how it works.
Well, you said a reasonable person, so...
Yeah, a reasonable person not what a reasonable person would think, what a reasonable person would expect. They would expect that police officer to have evidence that they're trans.
What evidence is available?
Exactly. Exactly. This is my whole point.
Well, I mean,
so you can't have that evidence. Therefore,
British Transport Police have said that they are going to strip search trans women.
Yeah. How do they know?
How do they know?
Go on.
They've got the clothes on.
Exactly. So, in actual fact, all a trans woman has to do is say that they're a woman. That's what I would advise. Say that they're a woman.
Yes, but then the police officer could think, I think you're lying. I think you're a trans woman.
Then if that police officer gets it wrong, that police officer is liable for prison. That's what I'm telling you legally. If that police officer, yes, if it goes through the courts, but if it goes through the courts, they will be convicted.
I'm not convinced, but we can.
That's how it is. That is the law.
Unfortunately,
I'm not saying they will definitely go to prison, because we've seen all too often where certain people get off to prison, but they won't get off the conviction, and they'll lose their job.
I think I've seen so many police officers who have done some horrific things.
Yeah, but how many of you
colleagues? Never mind to the general public.
Yeah, but have you seen them go to court and get away with it?
Well,
give me an example of someone who's. That's the problem. That's the problem. The problem is not that it's legal. The problem is that not enough go to court.
The problem is that we're now given basically a carte blanche to dodgy police officers, perverts, paedophiles in the Met to go and demand that a young woman takes their clothes off in front of them.
Then the very first time that happens, and I mean the very first time, people need to act as one and demand change. And actually, that's another argument you can use with the Labour MP.
Yes.
Because the very first time it happens, there needs to be a robust backlash.
Yes.
And everyone needs to commit to it.
I'd rather write to my MP now and say, this is the kind of thing we're opening the door to.
Yes.
And you can rely on the courts all you like, but the reality is, the lived reality of many people
is not a case of relying on the
away with shit.
I was just explaining that if it got to court, that police officer, if you get it wrong, you clearly didn't have good reason to suspect. That's not a good...
Well, who decides that, Phil? Like, who decides the good reason?
There is no good reason. There is no good reason to...
So then the British Transport Police put a thing out yesterday saying they're going to use male police officers to strip search trans women.
Because if they'll ask, are you a trans woman? If they say yes, then they go, well, it would be a woman then. But if they say no...
Okay, so if a trans woman gets taken in and for questioning, and they say, we're going to do a strip search, and we're going to, she says,
what I'm saying to you, let me just
so that they have a woman in the room when the trans woman is being strip searched, and then it comes out later that she's trans because they find some documentary evidence or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Will that trans woman then go to jail for exposing herself in front of a female officer?
For what? On what charge?
I don't know. Exposure.
But what I'm telling you is, because you're trying to argue it from the other way around, I'm going to explain to you from the police point of view. It's really this simple. If you suspect someone of being trans and you search them on that basis...
No. I didn't say of being trans.
No, I know you didn't. I'm trying to point it from the other point of view. If I'm trying to tell you that and this is not my view, I've seen barristers say this. If a police officer suspects someone of being trans, searches them on that basis and is wrong, they are breaking the law in a pretty serious way. Because they will have actually disobeyed the Equality Act. They will be in breach of the Equality Act.
Yeah.
And then the very legislation the TERFs think is on their side can be used against that officer.
Yes.
That's the simple fact of the matter. Now, if a police officer wants to be leery and do it anyway, as we know some will,
absolutely.
That is why,
empowered by this ruling.
As soon as it happens, no bullshit, as soon as it happens, there needs to be a group of people that agree they're going to write to their papers, they're going to write to their local papers, they're going to write to their MPs and everything else, and they're going to keep doing it, pointing it out, this happened, this woman, this biological woman that even J.K. Rowling accepts as a woman, was sexually abused by a male police officer, right? Yeah. And you want blood. That is what has to happen. And that campaign must not end. That is what I am saying needs to happen. You first of all have to contact MPs and say, this is the consequences. You could easily put it right now. If you wait because you think every police officer is whiter than white, until this blows up in a couple of years' time. You are then going to be forced to deal with it a year or two out from an election. It's much better to deal with it now.
Yeah. There's a really good point made by Ernie Burns here. The fact that we're having this argument just proves how, like, you know, the fact that this ruling has not made anything clearer. It has not clarified anything. Well, you're absolutely right. Because from my point of view, I think this gives a free pass to paedophile, predatory police officers to strip search young women on the justification that I thought they were trans. Yeah, but they said they weren't. Yeah, but they've been caught with all this drugs and they might have been lying.
It's really this simple. That police officer will have breached the Equality Act. Clear cut.
For what would actually be
where's the sorry?
What would be the transgression here?
Because they're supposed to be allowed to be searched by someone of the same sex. That's the Equality Act, isn't it? That's the whole point of this. That is the whole point of it. They'll be hoisted by their own petard.
I would hope so. But
they will be if people demand it, because what you will need to do.
It, but you're talking about people in marginalised situations under arrest anyway.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the progressive people who want to take action here. I want people to stop being stupid about this, because I'm sick of being always on the side of complete imbeciles when it comes to campaigning. What people will need to do is they'll need to make a big argument, not on trans rights, because if a male police officer strip searches a biological woman, leave the trans issue out of it to begin with, call for blood on the fact that a male police officer strip searched a woman and used a piss poor excuse, and make it such a hot potato, because that way even the gender critical people will have to, I mean, they're the ones who claim to be supporting women's rights. Yeah. Well, doesn't a woman have a right to be searched if they're going to be searched at all by a female officer, not a male?
Yep.
So that's the argument that should be used. People will want to go, this is why we do the trans thing. But what people will need to do is, first of all, say, this is an abuse of women's rights. Use that line of it, and then say, this would have been avoided if you agreed that trans rights are also women's rights.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, and this is why progressives lose far too often, because people will complain about the fact, oh yeah, but regressive right-wing nut jobs are all like really well funded. They've got the media and stuff like that. It says, yeah, but we've got the pissing. I'll tell you what it's like. Do you know Sun Tzu's Art of War? So it's quite good for political strategy as well. It talks about the need, if you have a big pitch battle where it's just two big armies against each other. Whoever loses was an idiot in a pitch battle, because you never fight a pitch battle if you have inferior forces. You fight guerrilla warfare. So if you have inferior forces, Sun Tzu's Art of War means you harry them. You little strikes, you pick off them at the flanks, their rear and stuff like that. Guerrilla tactics. The problem is that progressive parties use guerrilla tactics when we actually have the superior numbers and should have a pitch battle.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental problem.
We have superior numbers, but we don't have superior firepower. That's the difference.
We do. The money is neither here nor there. We've got people that you could get out onto the streets in their hundreds of thousands on a regular basis. They did over Palestine. Why can't we do that for issues that
for all the good it did? Well? For all the good it did.
It was all you're about. It was in the no. Well, it doesn't matter. The change of government changed that. The point is that it was always in the news. It was always in the news. If you want, so the fact that these people have control of the media, what does that matter if the news is going to then report on you? If you're coming out, and you can come out, you can march for the right for male police officers to not be allowed to strip search biological cis women, because they're going to claim, oh, sorry, thought you were trans, mate. In fact, on the, oh, sorry, thought you were trans, mate, I would turn that on its head. And I keep saying what we should do, what men should do, particularly if you've got like a nice soft face. I don't know whether I'd be good at it. I'd give it a try, don't worry. Men should start using women's toilets. Go in, and if someone goes...
I disagree, because I think that could be intimidating for women using the toilet. So if
you just say, I'm sorry, just say J.K. Rowling said I've got to.
I know, but I think you're attacking the wrong people. I mean, trans men using the female toilets.
But there's only so many trans men.
sorry, I've been told by the law that I have to use this toilet, even though, I'm a 6'6" bodybuilder.
Well, you could do that, but unfortunately there's very few trans men.
Yeah.
The point is that no one's going to know if you are or you're not. Because no one's going to, it'll be reported that someone who looked like a man came in and I didn't actually know if they were trans or not.
Yeah. But I think that if, you were going to make a statement like that, it couldn't just be a random thing. It would have to be a concerted thing at an event of TERFs or in Westminster or somewhere. If you get along to it, to make that point of like, well, we're all trans men, so this is the toilet we've told us that we have to use. This isn't pleasant, is it, for anyone? So yeah, I think that there's something to be said for sort of direct action, but I don't like it when it could upset people who have got no skin in the game here, who are just getting on with their lives. John, I've got loads of super chats that I need to get through. Sorry, we got a bit distracted on that debate. We've got John C. First of all, I thought I'd be signed up to a MAGA star. Lol. Thanks for the super chat. I'm signing up, but it's a MAGA star. Make Europe great again by I don't know, ignoring Trump. Ivan Ambrose, thank you very much for the £5 super chat. Trans rights is going to be a massive headache for Labour at the same time as cuts to disability benefits. I agree. Chris C there, because the Police Federation will kick off saying female officers will be at risk of harm if they are made to strip search male suspects. That's from Chris C. Alistair, £5 super chat. The number of trans people in the UK is 500,000. And I think the number of trans people with a gender recognition certificate is even smaller than that. It's a tiny number of the population. And One Angry Pagan there.
It's a few thousand.
Yeah, with this is a dangerous point of social flux. And also Alistair Kerr. Alistair, thank you very much, sir. Graham Phil, I now think there needs to be a change to this bill. Now also affects the Scottish bill, too. And so disgusting to see pictures in the papers of J.K. Rowling celebrating on her fucking yacht. She can do one. Couldn't agree more.
I mean, the Scottish thing is dead and buried. Like, no one's going to bring that back now. Not for a long while.
The Scottish bill, the 2018 Scottish bill.
No, well, the gender recognition bill. Where that blew up, I mean, that's what ultimately led to this, of course.
Yes.
Where that blew up, because that had, remember, cross-party support. There were MSPs from every party supporting it. And in fact, the opposition came from within the SNP itself, who were proposing the bill, some of their MSPs, and some Conservative MSPs. But there were also Conservative MSPs and 100% of Labour MSPs and Lib Dem MSPs and the Greens supported it. Where it went tits up was where that the issue of the trans prisoner, wasn't it?
Yeah,
where there was actually an attack.
Yeah, just like one attack. So the vast majority of sexual assaults that happen in jail that involve transgender people, it's nearly always like we're not even talking like 99%. We're talking like 999 times out of 1,000. It's the trans person being the victim. And yet the transphobes have used that data to say, look at all the sexual assault that goes on in jail because of trans people. And it's not. They're not the perpetrators. They're the victims in so many of those cases.
Exactly.
And
but that has killed it politically because which gets reported? What gets reported, that one case?
Yeah. And do you know what? The person who did that, they might not be transgender themselves. They might just be someone who is anti-transgender, who is doing this to make a point. There was a movie it was supposed to be a documentary, and it was like Ben Shapiro and all those gobshites in America. It came out a couple of years ago, and it was about them trying to be an all-male, female football team or hockey team or something. They're going into sports, and they found pretty quickly that they weren't allowed in because they were men. They thought they could just put on a dress and say, I'm a woman, and they'll instantly be able to win all the hockey leagues or something. And they're like, no, it doesn't work like that. What the hell? But in a lot of people's minds, they genuinely believe that a man can put a wig on and just walk into a female-only space and say, no, I self-identify as a woman, which was never a thing. It's never been a thing.
Wasn't.
self-ID isn't what people seem to think it was. It wasn't just you could just turn up one day and say, yes, I think that the other gender. Optimistic Nihilist, thank you very much for the £10 super chat. This isn't a one-off pattern. The corporate liberal elite who run Labour are always prepared to throw minorities under the bus and bend over for billionaires. They are not our allies anymore. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, well, by definition, if you're going to call them liberal, they're not the people you're talking about. The people you're talking about are not liberal. So, but the other thing as well, when you say bend over billionaires,
have Labour betrayed trans people, disabled people?
Yes, I mean, that's disabled people, yeah, trans people, yeah. Again, but it's not you can't call them a liberal elite because there's nothing liberal about this. It's mental.
True.
That's like calling Thatcher a socialist.
Yeah.
So she betrayed her socialist roots because she privatised stuff. Yes, because she's not a socialist. And by definition, if you pursue illiberal policies, now sure, it doesn't necessarily say anything about
capitalist elite. Then,
yeah. But at the same time, also this idea of like Labour bowing to the billionaires isn't true either. But that's a completely separate issue. It is very illiberal. There's nothing liberal about these policies, and it does sacrifice trans people for the sake of what they think is political advantage. The disabilities thing is slightly more complicated because they're not doing it to shit on disabled people. They are shitting on disabled people. They're not doing it to do that. They were doing it to plug a gap that they should have done some other way. It was the path of least resistance for them. Whereas there's no, and I would still say the economic argument was against it. There were better ways to do it. But but it was economic motivation to do that. The trans thing is purely political positioning. But again, it's one of these questions. It would be a very difficult question if you're going to say, if this meant Labour losing the election and the Tories would come in and trash trans rights anyway and everyone else's rights, then that would be a difficult question. But that is, from what I have seen, from the polling evidence I've seen, that is not the case. It's very low saliency. If Labour dealt with this now, there'd be a huge row in the media, but there is anyway. Yes, it would get bigger, but at the same time, Labour keep feeding the Tory media negative news stories anyway. Get it done now. In a few years' time, no one will even remember it because people don't know trans people.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I don't understand why Labour seems to just always fall into the trap of chasing the narrative of the other side. Like the other side set the narrative of what we talk about each day, and Labour fall into the trap instead of setting their own agenda. And I think they come out of the trap just straight away saying we're going to defend trans people's rights. The way that the Tories have eroded those rights over the last few years is disgraceful.
They don't even have to do that. They don't have to make a big deal of it. They can just say, okay, well, in line with the judgment, we need to offer a bit of clarity here, so we're just going to tidy up some of the definitions. Done.
Yeah.
And you don't have to make an issue out of it. All they had to do was just do that and suck all the oxygen out of it. The press would still make an issue of it, and all ministers would have to say, just use pre-prepared lines, just say, we're just tidying it up. We're just tidying it up in line with what the Supreme Court suggested.
Yeah. Someone was saying, what about the police? About most police are okay, but there's just a few. And like, I'm sorry, but the Met, the amount. I mean, we're not just talking about Wayne Couzens really and David Carrick and stuff, but we are talking about over 1,000 people who got jobs as police officers in the Met who were not vetted. Who were not even. So I'm not saying that they were all like wrong-uns, but they led a lot of wrong-uns.
But the other thing that came from, for example, the Couzens case, is their colleagues knew what they were like and didn't vote.
Yeah, and
like your first job is supposed to be to protect the public. Like, so if you're going to go out to the public and stop people who acting suspiciously from breaking the law, pretty much first stop should be stopping your own colleagues from going out on the streets in a uniform if you think they might break the law.
Yeah.
So the Met is I just think I think there are some genuine efforts to reform it, but I just think it's irreformable. I think they should just, and they could easily just effectively disband it and not have no police, but you could easily just split it off 26. And just have it as a normal London police force, and then get rid of the specialist units. As separate things.
Have them as separate things, but also you could have 26 different boroughs. Is it 32 boroughs? I don't know how many there are in London. So let's say 32 different jurisdictions, because it's not like the days where things were written down on pieces of paper that had to be passed from station to station when some potential sex offender moved from one place to another. It's all online. Like, it's all not online. It's all documented digitally. It's easy to share this information from one borough to the other. And in the same way that they share stuff between police stations across the Met, I just think the Met is too big, too unwieldy. If Labour are going to be talking about community policing and getting bobbies back on the beat and all this kind of stuff, it's only going to work if you decentralise it. And
I guess the argument against that is when you need to pull resources because London very often has like large protests where you need a lot of police, and they sometimes have to take them from forces like in Manchester and so on as well. So that would make it then harder to deploy.
You can see the Welsh police officers with the Welsh word for police is on their backs, and they're protesting in Manchester or in London or something. That's common. That happens anyway.
But what I mean is you'd add an extra level of bureaucracy and being able to quickly move police around. I think I'm not an expert. I think there might be a case of one London police force, but just make it a London police force at the very least, and separate it off from the dickheads.
Yeah. So just to go back to Labour's reaction to all this, Labour's there was a government spokesperson who said the ruling brought clarity and confidence to service providers, and as I think we've shown by our discussion today, it totally doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Labour Health Minister Karen Smith was unable to clarify what changing rooms trans women should use. So much for clarity. And Harriet Harman welcomed the ruling, saying it reflects legislative intent, which kind of worries me. LGBT Labour, or LGBT plus Labour, have said they were deeply disappointing and they will never stop fighting for trans equality. Young Labour students and the NEC member Elise Greenwood condemned the ruling in a joint statement. And Rosie Duffield, the ex-Labour MP, massive transphobe, says the ruling vindicates transphobic MPs, or she calls them gender critical, but they're not. They're just transphobes. And she wants Starmer to apologise. She wants Starmer to apologise to a transphobe,
Yeah,
and then Starmer has flip-flopped on this. In 2019, he supported self-ID before backpedaling under pressure. I mean,
well, the manifesto still says that it should be easier to get the GRC. However, the question needs to be asked to them: what for the because there's a process required, and a lot of people don't bother getting one because it's not worth it. And that was with the way things were last week. So you would have to ask: so what rights does this confer upon someone? Given that a lot of those rights are in the Equality Act.
Casey says there was clarity and confidence before the ruling, before it was taken, that sex and gender were interchangeable in the Act. Yeah, absolutely. And they've just muddied the waters more than anything. And many people feel like Labour have abandoned trans people.
Well, they have.
Right-wing culture warriors.
Yeah, there's zero doubt about that. I mean, when it was, you could sort of sense it. Where it started was when they panicked after there was a. It wasn't a slow, gradual thing. There was a sudden inflection point after the 2023 Uxbridge and South Ruislip loss, where they lost narrowly because they ran a shit campaign. But they had a panic on, and that's when they started, because they were. I mean, even front benchers like Wes Streeting were sticking two fingers up at Rosie Duffield and telling her to shut the fuck up. And that sort of changed from that point. And what it'll have been, it will have been to do with this. It'll have been to do with observing these changes in public attitudes without realizing that so I think about it from two people's point of view. Let's talk about, so you've got someone who's gender critical and you've got someone who is either trans or they're a friend or family or just supporter of a trans person, say. So which one is most likely to vote on trans issues? It's not the gender critical person, because when it comes down to it, they have their views. If you ask them their views, they have their views. But they don't know any trans people. It doesn't affect their life, so they don't base their vote on it. Whereas a trans person, it is their life, or a friend or a family of a trans person, or someone who cares for a trans person, it is their life, it affects their life. So they may change their vote based on it. So it just seems utterly ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's mental. And the other problem with it is, strategically, is it creates another row, along with the disabilities issue, along with the farming inheritance tax and all the rest of it. All these things which haven't really done Labour any good, they haven't helped them in any way.
Yeah.
And it just makes it more difficult for them to talk about the massive long list of things that they're doing well.
Well, yeah. I mean, they don't talk about that though, Phil. We often discuss the fact that Labour are absolutely shite at tooting their own horn. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're, it's not like they don't have the opportunity to do that, but they just choose not to take that opportunity because they think that the work, it'll what
they've got.
People will all realise one day. We'll all wake up collectively. By the way, it's Hethlu is the Welsh word for police. Yeah. Hethlu. So thanks. Who wrote that? Someone put that in the chat. Oh, Mr. Tisk. Thank you, Mr. Tisk.
It's probably not pronounced like that though.
Hethlu.
Okay.
It's spelled Heddlu, but it's pronounced Hethlu.
All right. Okay. But I mean, yeah, it just the thing is, like, Labour are going through this period at the moment, and they've sort of been open about this. This isn't speculation on my part. They've been telling their own MPs, okay, yeah, some of this stuff, it's unpopular, but we need to do it. But we're doing it early in the parliamentary cycle so that people will have forgotten about it in a few years' time. And it's like that is true. If you have to do some things that are unpopular in order for long-term gain, yes, you do it early in the parliamentary cycle. However, this risks the opposite. And that, again, is what I would say to Labour MPs. You're risking the opposite. You're putting off what might be unpopular. You may be forced to do it in 2 or 3 years' time if, as a result of this, people are being seriously assaulted or abused, not just trans people, but biological women, in line with what you just said about, the way the police may treat them. So
this sets back feminism years, not least because there's going to be, these culture warriors, these TERFs in toilets, and they're going to be shouting at women who, I heard a story about a woman who was kicked off in the bathroom because she had cancer and she was bald. And she was accused of being a trans woman and told to leave the bathroom by another Karen that was in the toilet. And this is going to happen times. It's falling into the patriarchal, idea of a Western beauty standard. And we saw this last summer at the Olympics when J.K. Rowling was decreeing that these non-white female athletes were actually trans women when they weren't. And in the case of Amani Khalif, she could be put in jail if she was a trans woman in Algeria. And it's just that level of misogyny that has been unleashed. And they don't even seem to realise it. The women who were coming out that courtroom on Wednesday, but they're outside the courtroom, popping the champagne. I will question any of them. And I know that sounds really prejudiced, and I know I probably shouldn't be commenting on people's looks, but if I was a Karen and I hung out in girls' toilets to decide who should be able to wee and who shouldn't, they'll be on the list of people that I would question.
But that's the angle that people need to take as well, because a lot of you need to actually put the emphasis on the way that biological women will suffer abuse from this more than the abuse won't be necessarily worse than for trans women, but in terms of raw numbers, just because there are more of them.
Yeah. But I think this is the angle that everyone needs to go down, especially trans allies who want to have the opportunity to express why this is such a bad idea, not just for our trans friends, but for women in general. This is horrific. Ivan, thank you very much for the £10 super chat. Really kind of you. I just need to say about last Saturday's session in Parliament on British Steel, Tory Alex Burghardt was an absolute disgrace. He's a particularly repugnant member of the Tory front bench. Thanks very much for the super chat. And like being a particularly repugnant member of the Tory front bench, I mean, that takes a bit of effort, doesn't it, considering the company you're keeping on the rest of that bench.
I don't remember what he said. What did he say? I only remember I remember Badenoch with her embarrassing turn. And Andrew Griffith.
She was blown up by Johnny Reynolds, where he just said,
"Do you know what?
You were lying."
I will say
that was the closest I've seen a politician to accuse someone of lying and get away with it in Parliament. It was quite masterful the way he did it.
She did, but that is actually the word I would use. Do you know what? He actually impressed me, Jonathan Reynolds, on Saturday. I think he's been quite good. If I think about, because obviously there's talk of reshuffles in the air. And if I think about like how different cabinet members have performed so far, he's actually been one of the standout ones, I would say. And that thing on Saturday, I was just hoping against hope that he would be able to get those materials to Scunthorpe, which he did.
Yeah.
Because if he hadn't been able to do it in time, that would have knackered his reputation. But actually, he can come out of this with a lot of credit now.
Yeah.
And he has done quite well in general, I would say, but that was because he completely stitched Badenoch up.
Yes.
Completely. And he did it really well as well. He came across, he's not like Wood and like Starmer. He was like appealing to his benchers and it was quite animated. It's like, go on then, go on. You can tell me I'm wrong. Because, Badenoch had the previous day said, I negotiated a deal with British Steel. And then she said, I was only in negotiations. Well, you said you'd done it. Where is it? We haven't got it written down. Where is it?
I don't think she realises half the words that fall out of her face. She doesn't realise what
she's very reactionary. She's just a reactionary.
Yeah.
And which is fine on social media if you just want to be a social media gobshite. It doesn't work quite so well if you're supposed to be forming a coherent strategy for a political party.
Yeah. So Mr. Tiska saying agree about Reynolds. Yeah, one to watch, which is good news for me. Johnny's one of the early supporters of this channel, so that's all good. Chris, agree with you there. Starmer won't be lasting in the full term. If he does, it will be Labour's only turn in office. They will lose the next general election at this rate without shifting gears. I don't really agree with that, Chris. I don't think that they will lose the next election. And you might play this back in 4 years' time and say, "Ha, Graham, you were wrong." And I will wear a hat that says I was wrong and I accept responsibility. But if you look at the polling, the people are just sort of getting on with their lives at the moment. I think people are freaking out about Trump a lot more than they're freaking out about Labour. I know we are, but we're, politics wars.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, you look at the situation, Labour could not, if they tried to make themselves unpopular, I don't know what more they could have done other than actually kick to death a live puppy on television.
This puppy.
I really don't know what more they could do. And yet, they're still basically, okay, it's not much of a lead. And the lead, like the Tories, Reform UK and Labour are also basically the same within the margin for error.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're still there, and when people are already noticing the improvements in the NHS around where I am, like I say, I live in the gammon country. People are actually openly going, "Oh yeah, the NHS definitely got better." They're noticing it.
Yeah.
They're not looking at Labour's comms, but they are noticing that the NHS is getting better. So that will be they will see that, and they will see when the employment rights bill comes online. Remember, that's still going through Parliament. A lot of this legislation is still going through Parliament that they need. As soon as that's gone through and it's in force, people are going to see it in the next year or two. And these issues are they're going to win back a lot of support that didn't believe them last year because they were just getting used to things being a bit too crap. Now, Trump, yes, obviously is a bit of a hurdle. There are a few other hurdles as well. And then you think to yourself from the other side of it, so the Conservatives aren't coming back.
No, well, this is it. This is why I don't think. I mean, look, the two things that have to happen in the next few years in order for Labour to really face a challenge at the next election is that the refuck need to go away, which they're not going to do, and the Tories need to get their shit together. And they haven't even started getting the shit together. It's going to take a long time for the Tories to get the shit together again. Don't forget, after they were knocked out in 1997, they went through 3 different leaders before they arrived at Cameron. And it took them 13 years to get back on the horse. And even then, they didn't win an outright majority.
And again, and this feeds back to this strategy of Labour's, they didn't fight a campaign on economic policy. They fought one on social policy. But there we go. To the question there, Medusa saying, my confidence in the IOPC, I didn't mention the IOPC. Nothing to do with the IOPC. I have no confidence in them either. This is like police unions in America; they're useless. What's needed is for lawyers to take action. What you really need is, I mean, you can't say the Good Law Project do everything, but if there is a case of a biological woman, say, and unfortunately it will have to be a biological woman to really make a big issue of it, being abused in this way, what you need is some lawyers to agree to take this action.
Yeah.
You know, maybe a Good Law Project would.
Well, Good Law Project. We need to do Trans Aid. That's what we need to do. We need to have a big concert and raise £1 million for the Good Law Project to pursue all this stuff. So, yeah, if anyone knows any rock stars, if anyone knows, like, I don't know, Bob Geldof or something who can call up Wembley Stadium and say, hey, can we have your stadium for free, please? That'd be great. Unfortunately, the guys I know from bands in this country are like, I don't know, Ash and Gomez, who are fantastic, and you really want to see them live, but they're not big enough to carry that kind of event. Maybe Dave from Blair. We should have a word with Dave. But he's Labour, so he might go, oh shit, I can't.
I mean, I think in the first instance, you explain to Labour MP, see what they'll be thinking, and they're right, you know, because trans issues has such low saliency, then the argument to do nothing is just as powerful as the argument to do something. But just to tell them, just make sure it's clear that the ways that this could blow up, and if it does, they may be forced to have to deal with it much closer to the election. Isn't it better to deal with it now?
Yeah. Well,
and if they're forced to as well, they've lost a lot of their credibility because they will have been forced into it. Right?
I mean, what we need to see is Labour doing a commitment to a full trans-inclusive Equality Act reform. But also, we need these third space provisions in all public institutions. And that doesn't exist at the moment. And we often talk about trans people making cisgender women feel unsafe in public bathrooms. And we don't talk enough about trans women feeling unsafe because of what cisgender women might do to them.
If a trans woman goes into a man's toilets, then, you know, a skinhead may well think, oh, fair game, but I'll beat you up.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's those issues, and we need trans healthcare investment, and we need a reform of the Gender Recognition Act to make it to bring it up to date.
That was promised. That has been promised in the manifesto.
Bring it up to date.
But again, what rights does it confer if you don't tidy up the Equality Act?
So what we can do, obviously, support LGBT plus charities and legal aid organisations, stuff like the Good Law Project. Please check out their websites, full of really great articles about what's going on, the legal aspects of it, and it doesn't talk down to you, but at the same time, it makes it simple enough for laymen like myself to understand. But really, really important, something that you can do right away, something you can do today if you've got the time. Write to your MP. Write to your MP explaining these things that we've been talking about. So maybe some stuff that you're thinking about in these terms, and explain how it's going to make life more difficult for everyone unless this is sorted out. And this idea of like, oh, it's now sorted out once and for all, and it's like nothing is ever sorted out once and for all. When has anything been sorted out once and for all? It doesn't happen. And you think we could become more progressive, but it turns out we have to keep on fighting every step of the way.
There's always retrograde steps. I mean, it started with racism was being elbowed out of open society over a period of time, and then that got dialed back from the mid-noughties with Brexit. And the same thing's happening here.
We need to obviously as well stand up for our trans family, colleagues, friends, now more than ever. But our duo sir, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, X in the chat is saying the ECHR withdrawal is the real end goal. It's European Court of Human Rights, and it is. And the reason why the two big hot button issues the last few years have been transgender rights and small boat crossings. The reason why we haven't seen safe routes brought in or any clarity in our laws is because there is a group of gruesome billionaires who want to take all your rights away from you. And the only way they can do that effectively is by taking us out of the European Court of Human Rights.
Persuading people that another group of people are abusing certain rights, so we should take those rights away. And not letting those people think, I'm going to admit that, but they're my rights as well. Oh, but it won't affect you. We're just talking about, because that's what they did like with the ECHR. Oh, we're going to pull out the ECHR, but we'll have our own Bill of Rights, right? We just want a British Bill of Rights because we just don't like this little aspect of it that only affects foreigners and doesn't affect you lot. And it's like, yeah, but that's not what we'll do. Yeah. And we're going to see this in America. We're going to see it in America. Like Trump is already talking about deporting people who were born in America.
Yeah.
Born and raised.
Homegrowns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Deporting them to death camps in other countries. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Thanks very much to Phil for coming on the show. If you want to follow him, head over to A Different Bias, as his link should be in the description, I think, of this video. I'm sure you can find him. And I'll be back tonight at 9:30 for the Politics Social. So grab a drink, hot drink, cold drink, whatever floats your boat, whatever's your poison. Come join us at 9:30 tonight. We'll be talking through a lot of this stuff and building this community on here to make sure that no one feels left out and no one feels like completely alone in what's happening in the world at the moment. Because I know it's becoming an increasingly scary place, and we need that solidarity. We need that community. Just to stay sane, to be honest with you.
But also just make sure because I mean, my whole thing about earlier on about what the police can and cannot do legally is make sure you know your own rights, because a lot of people get away with abuse because victims don't think they have any recourse.
Yeah.
And that's their big power.
Yeah.
So know your rights and know the ways in which you can enforce your rights.
That's why the Tories got rid of all the citizens' advice bureaus. Yeah. Well, not all of them, but they tried. Kieran and the libraries. Kieran, thank you very much for the £2 super chat to help with the goal. That's really kind of you. Thank you. Big shout out to everyone in the chat, everyone who's dropped a message today. Thank you to everyone who's given the super chat. If you could do a small favour on the way out, if you could just hit that like button, that would be wonderful. So please, yours, hit like if you can. There you go. Made the animation come up. Whoop. And until next time, I'll say thank you so much for watching. And hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.